Hello, it's me, Brody McLeod again. This is like the fourth YouTube video I've done today. It's mainly because I'm bored to tears and they don't get any views anyway, so it doesn't really make any difference. But somebody might see it, and if they do, it might make them think a bit differently. And I don't know really. I think self-loathing and self-deprecation has like a place in society, but at the same time, kind of like the obverse of assertiveness is like, I hate the words self-care, proactive, and mindfulness. Those three words: self-care, proactive, and mindfulness. Mindfulness is basically some sort of like fucking plethora of fucking baggy trousers wearing fucking sourdough mums from St. Werburgh's who, turn up at a club with a bucket of K in the face and a dog on a string and get in for free. I don't know, like mindfulness. Does anyone practice mindfulness? Is it just like a sort of a buzzword for the new generation for meditation or prayer? I don't know. I don't do fucking mindfulness. Proactive is pretty much a shot to the skull. I think if you work in my business, I keep a fully automatic weapon with a suppressor and those smaller like 5.68mm NATO rounds inside. I will shoot you if you say proactive around me directly in the face, probably with the sort of setting to fire several rounds a second. And yeah, this video is about a philosophical kind of diatribe or dialectic about kind of truth, confidentiality, and lying, and also cost, price, and value. These things there's a word I've invented, right? It's equanimitable. It's not in the dictionary, but it's in my dictionary, and it kind of means like equitable, but also sort of like, don't know, relevant to one another or subversively connected through sort of holistic interpretation or contextual manifestation, whichever you want to swallow a dictionary and regurgitate it up as that's what it is, equanimitable. I think that cost, value, and price, and truth, lies, and confidentiality do bear a sort of cosseted, if not tenuous, kind of link to each other in terms of their purport. So I'll read you what it says in the Gemini thing, and then I'm going to bed because I've taken my painkillers, my Zopiclone and my diazepam. Hopefully won't take a massive overdose when I leave of those in a big box and end up in a coma again or in a coffin, as much as I'm sure that would make your day. For some people, it's quite important that I exist in the world, as much as you might believe to the contrary. And yeah, I fucked up pretty hard. I don't make any qualms about that, but I am here to help. And although you might think I'm a useless prat, there's a lot of shit I can do that none of you can do, and that you don't seem to know about, like this like telepathic hive mind that you've got. Like, I know shit that you guys know nothing about, and it's like I'm like a one-way telepath. So like I can conform sentences in my head. I can speak to somebody who's telepathic, but I'm deaf. I can't hear what they say in return. There's no way of them kind of communicating with me. It's like one of the biggest secrets in the world. Like, schizophrenics really can hear voices in their head. Like, telepathy is real. And only fucking idiots go to the NHS, or maybe not. Like that. I feel like a duty bound. I've driven people to suicide and to murdering their own family members, and I sort of feel duty bound to work in mental health. Do you know what I mean? It's like I've got like whatever else I'm going to put my energy into, it should be trying to save people who are suicidal. After when I sort of like had like three my first suicide attempts in 2024 was quite heavy. Well, I don't want to make that as a theme for this video, but there was multiple times I sort of self-harmed and sequestered medicine in 2024. And yeah, that's a very sensitive topic. I don't want to get YouTube shadow banned. Not that I'm probably not already, but you know what I mean. Anyway, enough of me talking. It's 5 minutes now. Let's read this fucking shitty thing that the internet wrote for me. I like the word parallax. Don't know why, I just do. The conceptual parallax of worth and truth, a dialectic on the economics of deception. The architecture of human interaction rests upon two foundational pillars: the material exchange of goods and the immaterial exchange of information. To navigate the complexities of society, humanity relies on overlapping frameworks to negotiate reality, survive social friction, and extract utility from the surrounding environment. To examine these frameworks is to engage in a profound philosophical dialectic, one that comparatively equates the economic taxonomy of cost, value, and price with the psychosocial taxonomy of lying, secrecy, and confidentiality. At first glance, these two trios appear to inhibit distinctly separate terms. One governs the ledger of the market, the other governs the morality of the mind. However, beneath the surface of colloquial vernacular, they reveal themselves as intricate reflections of one another. They operate as opposames, distinct categorical manifestations of identical underlying states of human behavioral mechanics, but dialectically, psychosocially establishing the inertial difference between each concept, a corollary and engaging narrative emerges. This analysis will provide consideration of where each concept exists in isolation, how it shares an introspective relationship with its corresponding numbers counterpart, and how it draws out a necessary conceptual parallax across the domains. Ultimately, this dialectic will demonstrate that the intrinsic value, cost, or price of a material entity bears an ineffable, deeply structural relationship with human deception, driving us to the conclusion that truth is simultaneously an objective absolute and a subjective utility. So part one is about the ontology of the material and moral domains. To construct a rigorous dialectic, one must first isolate the strict definitions and mild variations of the six concepts. In everyday language, these terms are frequently conflated, obscuring their true economic and moral mechanisms. The material economy, cost, value, and price. So in the domain of commerce, the triad of material valuation dictates the survival of the market, yet the public perpetually mixes these terms, declaring that a good costs too much when they're actively critiquing its price, or asserting a commodity is priceless when they're attempting to articulate its value. Cost, the first concept, represents the price of acquisition. In rigid economic terms, cost is the absolute measure of resources expanded in the production or procurement of a good or services. It's a historical anchor of reality that includes monetary expenses, time, labour, opportunity costs, and the physical degradation of minerals. The classical labour theory of value, championed by figures like Adam Smith and Karl Marx, roots the economic weight of a good in the social necessary labour time required to produce it. Cost is the hidden expenditure. It's the silent burden of the creator endures in the dark. It is fundamentally objective, representing a measurable depletion of resources that exist entirely independent of the consumer's gaze. Value, the second concept, represents the inert functionality or usefulness of an entity. Value is not a numerical figure, rather it's the subjective capability of an object to fulfill a human need or desire. While cost is a measure of past expenditure, value is a measure of present and future utility. It remains stable across market fluctuations, existing as an intrinsic property that is activated only through interaction. Value exists on a spectrum between the instrumental in brackets, valuable because it leads to other good things, and the intrinsic in brackets, value in itself. For instance, a pharmaceutical company might spend billions developing a drug, incurring a monumental cost, but if the drug proves ineffective, its value is absolutely zero. Conversely, inexpensive software innovation may possess world-altering value. Value is a silent worth that persists regardless of market conditions. Price, the third concept, is the loss, sacrifice, and exchange one must endure in order to procure goods and services. It's the numerical intersection where supply meets demand, acting as a signaling mechanism that conveys information about scarcity and willingness to pay. Crucially, price is an externalized projection. It's not the cost, the internal burden, nor is it the value, the inert utility. It's a negotiated friction, a temporary agreement between two parties to facilitate a transfer of ownership. It's the interface through which the sacrifices of the buyer and the seller are reconciled into a single transactional moment. The moral economy, lying, secrecy, and confidentiality. Parallel to the material economy is the moral economy of information. Just as humans trade goods, they trade truths, half-truths, and illusions to survive, maintain the social fabric, and navigate the relentless demands of society. Lying, the first concept of the moral triad, is the act of profligating an illusory concept to another person. It's the intentional presentation of a false reality. Philosophers have long debated the ontology of the lie. Immanuel Kant argued that lying is an absolute moral wrong, a categorical violation of human dignity, and corrupts the rational power of free choice. For Kant, to lie is to treat another person merely as means to an end. Conversely, utilitarian thinkers propose that lying can be a necessary mechanism if it maximizes benefit or minimizes harm. Cicella Bock, in her foundational work on the subject, notes that while lying carries a strong negative connotation and undermines social trust, the practice is frequently rationalized as a means to achieve a public good. Regardless of the ethical stance, lying serves as the outward projection of manipulated information, a false signal sent into the social market. Secrecy, the second concept, is the act of keeping something hidden, a state of intentional concealment whereby both evil and beneficence can exist without abatement. Sociologist George Simmel defines a secret as the ultimate sociological form for the regulation of the flow and distribution of information, observing that human interaction is shaped just as much by the capacity to be silent as it is by the capacity to speak. Secrecy is inherently neutral in its architecture. It's a boundary, a denial of access to others. Like a vault, it can conceal a vicious betrayal or a beautiful surprise. It requires an internal expenditure of cognitive energy to maintain, forcing the holder to continuously monitor their environment and guard the hidden truth against external inquiry. Confidentiality, the third concept, is a highly structured, consensual framework whereby both lying and secrecy may need to be deployed to maintain a semblance of peace, security, and order. While secrecy is often unilateral and potentially self-serving, confidentiality is mutual, often institutionalized covenant. It is the expectation of control over the disclosure of information shared within a privileged relationship, such as the sacred trust between a physician and a patient, or a lawyer and a client. Confidentiality acknowledges that the first two concepts, lying and secrecy, are ostensibly considered immoral and emotionally naive, but it acquiesces to their use through a formalized system. In this state, an individual may be required to deceive an inquiring third party to protect the confidential information of their client, transforming an otherwise immoral lie into an instrument of systemic justice. So part two is the introspect relationship, so the dialectic, direct counterparts. So to fully map the dialectic, one must first examine the introspective relationship between the corresponding numbers in the listed counterparts. How does the first element of the material list interact with the first of the moral list? What psychological symmetries bind them? I'm not going to read you that chart because, well, maybe I will. Right, so you got in the first column material concept, second column the moral concept. So cost, the price of acquisition, doesn't have a moral concept equal. But then you've got cost and lying. I think it's hallucinated this. There's just nothing in the first bit. And I'm just not going to bother with this table. You can just read what it says. Cost and lying, the origin of deficit. The first pairing bridges cost, the price of acquisition, with lying, profligating an illusory concept. At their core, both concepts involve a generative deficit, a fundamental depletion that must occur to bring something new into the theatre of human interaction. Cost is the depletion of material capital, time, and labour. Lying is the depletion of moral capital, trust, and objective reality. When one acquires an object, they absorb its cost. Similarly, when one acquires a false reality by telling a lie, they absorb the cognitive and moral cost of its creation. The liar must extend tremendous psychological effort to construct the illusion, profligate it to their audience, and meticulously ensure that subsequent statements do not contradict the initial fabrication. Cicella Bock illustrates that the proliferation of lies creates a fragile societal foundation. The cost of a lie is rarely confined to the immediate moment, as it invariably demands further deception, acting as a compounding debt upon the liar's psyche. In a perfectly transparent, frictionless moral universe, truth would be the default state, requiring no extra expenditure of energy. Lying, therefore, is an acquisition. It is the active procurement of a scenario that does not naturally exist, just as acquiring a physical commodity requires a cost. Acquiring an alternative reality requires a profound psychological and ethical cost. So then you've got value and secrecy, the reservoir of potential. So the second pairing unites value, inert functionality, with secrecy, keeping something hidden. Both concepts are defined by their latency. They do not require an active public transaction to exist. They're reservoirs of potential energy that harbour immense influence over individual possessing them. Value is the usefulness of a thing, a measure of its capability to satisfy a desire or execute a function. This functionality is inert. A sharp knife has value regardless of whether it's currently cutting anything. Secrecy operates on the exact same ontological frequency. A secret is inert information. It is kept hidden, a state whereby both evil and beneficence can exist without abatement. The sociologist George Simmel theorized that a secret acts as an inner property, a form of informational capital that can be hoarded and leveraged. The introspective relationship here is the realization that secrecy is a form of value. The ability to restrict access to information inherently makes that information valuable. If anyone knows a piece of information, its strategic value is zero. It is the boundary of the secret, the darkness in which it is kept, that grants its functionality similarity Similarly, it's late. The value of certain material assets is entirely dependent on secrecy. In intellectual property management, a trade secret possesses an astronomical economic value exclusively because it is hidden from competitors. The moment the secrecy is breached, the value evaporates. Thus, value and secrecy share an introspective bond. They require unactivated powers that define the parameters of human capability. The third one, equinimitable, is price and confidentiality, the covenant of exchange. So the third pairing aligns price, in brackets, loss, sacrifice, and exchange, with confidentiality, the deployment of lying and secrecy to maintain peace. Both concepts serve as the ultimate structural arbitrators of their respective realms. They represent the final terms of engagement. Price is the sacrifice one must endure to procure a good. It is the threshold that must be crossed to participate in the market. Confidentiality is the informational sacrifice one must endure to procure systemic peace, security, and order. In a confidential relationship, such as that between a defense attorney and a guilty client, the attorney sacrifices their personal desire for absolute public truth in exchange for the systemic good of a fair trial. The lawyer may be required to deploy silence, in brackets, secrecy, or narrative misdirection, in brackets, a form of lying, to uphold the covenant of confidentiality. This is the introspective resonance. Confidentiality is the price a society pays to maintain complex, fragile relationships. Society ostensibly considers lying and secrecy to be immoral and emotionally naive, yet it actively acquiesces to these behaviors through confidentiality, because the alternative, a brutal, unfiltered exchange of absolute truth, would cause societal architecture to collapse. Just as an economy cannot function if buyers refuse to endure the sacrifice of a price, a society cannot function if its institutions refuse to endure the moral sacrifice of confidentiality. The price of peace is the formalized, systemic tolerance of the unsaid. Part 3, this is my best bit except for the table, the parallax of opposames, the cross relationship. So while the direct numerical counterparts reveal the structural symmetries of acquisition, potential, and exchange, the true genius of the dialectic is found in the conceptual parallax. By cross-mapping the material and moral terms, we expose the opposames, where a material concept functions identically to a non-corresponding moral concept in the theatre of human behaviour. Probably this field table will be quite useful, but so you got cost and secrecy, the latent burden. So the most profound cross relationship exists between cost and secrecy. Both represent the hidden internal reservoirs of latency that precede any interaction with the external world. Cost is the concealed history of a material object. When a consumer looks at a finished product, they're utterly blind to the sweat of the labourer, the extraction of raw materials, the logistical nightmares, and the sunk capital that brought it into existence. These elements constitute the cost, and they are inherently buried beneath the polished facade of the final commodity. Similarly, a secret is the hidden history of a mind or an organization. It's an internal reality, heavily guarded, requiring continuous cognitive administrative expenditure to prevent its leakage into the public domain. Just as a manufacturer must absorb the financial cost of production, the keeper of a secret must absorb the psychological cost of concealment. Both states require immense energy to maintain their boundaries. The greater the material cost of an item, the more protective the creator must be of their investment. The greater the magnitude of a secret, the more protective the individual must be of their mental fortress. Furthermore, both cost and secrecy operates stubbornly independent of external validation. A cost is incurred regardless of whether the product ever sells, just as secrets exist regardless of whether anyone else knows to ask about it. In this dialectical parallax, secrecy is the moral cost of processing restricted information, while cost is the material secret of the production process. To reveal a cost to a competitor is to lose economic leverage. To reveal a secret to an adversary is to lose a political leverage. Both are objective, burdensome realities that resist exposure. Price and lying to sacrificial interfaces. If cost and secrecy are hidden internal realities, then price and lying are their externalized performative counterparts. The second parallax establishes them as the sacrificial interfaces through which human transactions occur. Price is the number attached to a good, the declared loss or exchange one must endure. However, from a philosophical standpoint, price is fundamentally an illusion, a socially constructed signal that rarely equates directly to the objective cost or the subjective value of an item. A luxury timepiece may cost very little to manufacture at low cost and serve only the basic function of telling the time, a low inert value. Yet it commands an exorbitant price. The price, therefore, is a form of economic storytelling. It is the lie the market tells to protect prestige, scarcity, and exclusivity. Lying is the exact moral equivalent of pricing. It's the outward declaration of a false or manipulated reality presented to the social market to facilitate an interaction, avoid conflict, or secure an advantage. Just as a seller sets a price higher than the cost to extract a profit margin, a liar projects a falsehood to extract social profit, be it admiration, safety, or the avoidance of punishment. The liar endures a sacrifice of moral steadfastness in exchange for a desired outcome, just as the buyer endures a sacrifice of capital. When a consumer encounters an exorbitant price, they often exclaim, "That's a rip-off," or "That price is a lie." They're intuitively recognizing that the projected interface, the price, in brackets, does not correspond to the underlying reality, the value, in brackets. Similarly, when a lie is exposed, a social contract is breached and interpersonal trust is bankrupted. Both price and lying are fluid, negotiated functions that allow us to interact without bearing the unbearable weight of objective truth or objective cost. To demand absolute truth in every social interaction, as Kant rigidly proposed, would be equivalent to an economy operating without the abstraction of price, a bartering system of raw, unvarnished realities that would grind human relations to an immediate and violent halt. Price is the lie we agree to pay. Lying is the price we pay to belong. Value and confidentiality, the functional equilibriums. The final parallax marries value with confidentiality. If cost and secrecy are the raw, hidden inputs and the price and lying are transactional interfaces, then value and confidentiality are the functional equilibriums, the ultimate utility derived when the system operates correctly. Value is the inert functionality of a thing. It's not what it was paid for it, it's not what it cost to make, it's what it does. A lifeboat has immense value to a drowning person, regardless of its price or manufacturing cost. Value is the point where the material object aligns with necessity to create stability, satisfaction, and worth. Confidentiality is the psychosocial equivalent of value. It's a state whereby the dangerous energies of lying and secrecy are deployed under a strict, agreed-upon framework to maintain peace and order. Confidentiality takes the raw, volatile energy of a secret and gives it inert, systemic functionality. It transforms the hoarding of information from an act of individual paranoia into an act of profound social utility. In the medical realm, confidentiality is the bedrock of societal health. Patients only reveal their deepest physical or psychological ailments because they trust a physician will synthesize those secrets into confidentiality. This trust is the ultimate social value. Therefore, value and confidentiality are opposames because both represent the acquisition of worth. They are the states whereby the chaos of the market and the chaos of human deception are temporarily suspended, resulting in an environment where safety, utility, and human dignity are preserved, just as economic value bridges the gap between the producer's cost and the consumer's price. Confidentiality bridges the gap between the individual's secret and the society's demand for truth. Part 4. The psychosocial inertia and the frictional mechanics of truth. To truly master the dialectical and psychosocial relationship between these trios, one must examine the psychological forces that govern their movement. In physics, inertia is the resistance of any physical object to any change in its state of motion. In human behavior, psychological inertia is defined as the innate tendency to maintain the status quo or default option unless compelled by a massive psychological motive to intervene or reject it. This concept is the invisible friction that dictates the low cost translate into price, how cost translates into price, and how secrecy therefore erupts into lying. The inertial weight of the hidden. Where there is a profound inertial weight to cost and secrecy. When a corporation sinks millions of pounds into the cost of a failing project, psychological inertia, manifesting as the sunk cost fallacy, prevents them from abandoning it. They're locked in an inertial state, unable to translate their objective cost into a realistic market price because the effort required to break the paradigm and admit defeat is too high. Similarly, the psychological inertia of maintaining a secret can be paralyzing. Secrecy requires an individual to build an internal architecture of silence. The longer a secret is held, the more inertia mass grows. The default state becomes concealment. To break from secrecy and utter a truth, or to break from secrecy and proactively formulate a lie to protect it, requires a massive injection of psychological force to overcome the friction of the status quo. Individuals suffering from severe mental health disorders, such as schizophrenia, often display increased psychological inertia, making them less able to convert their preferences into actions due to the overwhelming cost of the effortful behavior. The mental load of maintaining a complex network of secrets functions similarly, including a state of decision fatigue and abolition. The kinematics of social synchrony. So in biokinematics, casual observation suggests that an individual can achieve a one-to-one frequency locking with two distinct biokinetic links, regardless of the size of an inertial difference between them. In the psychosocial realm, this translates to the human ability to perfectly synchronize a massive inertial secret with a fluid everyday lie. Despite the heavy cognitive burden, the high inertial mass of the secret, the individual calibrates their outward behavior, the lie, to match the frequency of normal social interaction, effectively hiding the inertial difference from the outside world. This social motor synchrony is essential for survival. If an individual's outward projection, their lie, staggered under the weight of their inertial burden, their secret, the deception would be immediately exposed. The human mind acts as a master differential gear, smoothing out the massive inertial differences between what is known, cost or secrecy, and what is shown, price lying, to maintain interpersonal connectedness. The momentum of the interface. When one examines the transactional interfaces, price and lying, the mechanics of an inertia operate with terrifying momentum. A price set in the market creates its own inertia. A brand that has historically priced its goods at a premium creates an entrenched psychological expectation. Lowering the price requires overcoming market inertia, risking the destruction of the illusion of value. So lying operates on an identical inertial curve. When a lie is deployed into the social sphere, it establishes a new artificial status quo. To maintain the lie, the individual must continuously align their subsequent actions with the initial falsehood. One lie, the lie, gains psychological momentum. Overcoming the inertia of a lie is to finally tell the truth, often requires cataclysmic external force, as the internal friction of admitting deceit is deemed too socially costly. As Bock points out, lies require a scaffolding of further lies to survive, creating an inescapable web of deception that demands ever-increasing cognitive and social energy. The lie becomes an internal juggernaut. Confidentiality and value, by contrast, represent inertial rest. When a good is truly valuable, its utility does not require artificial energy to maintain, it simply functions. Confidentiality acts as a psychosocial dampener. It absorbs the erratic, high-energy friction of secrets and lies, locking them into a stable, low-energy orbit. By institutionalizing the secret, the individual is relieved of the personal psychological inertia required to hide it. The burden is transferred to the system, reducing friction and allowing society to function efficiently. Part 5. The vernacular of moral economics. The deep resonance between these two domains is further evidenced by the shared vernacular humanity uses to describe them. Society routinely blends the lexicon of commerce with the lexicon of morality, demonstrating an intuitive, subconscious recognition of their shared architecture. We speak of individuals paying a heavy price for their deceptions. We describe someone as cheap, not just in their financial habits, but the poverty of their honesty and the shallowness of their character. We talk about the cost of a lie, implicitly understanding that deception draws upon a finite reserve of social capital and trust. When an individual maintains a highly guarded piece of personal information, we say they are holding a valuable secret, directly equating the moral act of concealment with the economic act of asset hoarding. The shared vernacular highlights the profound ethical conundrums generated by the conceptual parallax. Society ostensibly considers lying and secrecy to be immoral, emotionally naive, and a stark delineation from moral steadfastness and righteousness. Yet, society simultaneously glorifies the mechanics of price and cost, which operate on the exact same philosophical axes of illusion, market manipulation, and hidden burdens. Why does humanity condemn the liar but lionize the marketeer? Why is the strategic withholding of a truth a sin in the living room, but a celebrated corporate strategy as a trade secret in the boardroom? The answer lies in the dissonance between deontological and consequentialist ethics. The marketer's lie, an inflated price, is accepted under the utilitarian belief that free markets ultimately produce a greater good, economic growth, and innovation. The individual's lie is condemned under the Kantian belief that personal deception violates the universal duty to respect human autonomy, yet the dialectic proves these are mechanically identical acts. A price is just a commercial lie. A lie is just a social price. Part 6. The synthesis of truth, subjective versus objective. The profound interconnectedness drives the dialectic towards an ultimate synthesis regarding the nature of truth itself. In philosophy, truth is often bifurcated into the objective, the correspondence theory, where beliefs must rigidly align with an independent physical reality, and the subjective, in brackets, the coherence theory, where beliefs are validated by their adherence to a socially constructed narrative. Our dual trios elegantly map onto this philosophical divide. So we have the domain of objective truth. Cost and secrecy are the domains of objective truth. The amount of steel used to build a bridge is an objective fact. These specific actions a person took at midnight that they should now wish to keep a secret are objective facts. They correspond directly to physical and historical reality. They are unalterable. The domain of subjective truth, price and lying are the domains of subjective truth. They are constructs of the coherence theory. A price is only true if the market believes it and agrees to pay for it. A lie is only true as long as the deceived party's belief system coheres around it. They're fluid, negotiated realities that rely entirely on the perception of the observer. As economic theorists note, value is subjective because different people have wildly different preferences, necessitating an objective framework like prices and property rights to allow them to coexist. Paradoxically, the lie, the subjective truth, provides the necessary padding to allow humans to navigate objective reality without destroying one another. The domain of synthesized truth, the value and confidentiality represent a dialectical synthesis, the point where subjective and objective truth merge into functional absolute. Confidentiality acknowledges the objective truth of the secret, but applies a subjective moral framework to its containment, generating an objective state of peace. Value acknowledges the objective cost of an item, but applies subjective utility of the user, generating an objective improvement in the user's life. In dialectical materialism, reality is a process driven by internal contradictions, the interpenetration of opposites, where thesis and antithesis clash to produce synthesis. The tension between the objective, hidden reality, cost or secrecy in brackets, and the subjective projected illusion, i.e. price or lying, is the central contradiction of the human condition. We're forced to navigate a world where what a thing is rarely what it is called. Yet, it's through the friction of this very contradiction that all human progress, peace and utility, or you could argue value and confidentiality, are generated. Here's the conclusion. To separate the mechanics of the market from the mechanics of the mind is an epistemological error of the highest magnitude. The dialectic reveals that the material of the moral are inexorably linked, operating on identical principles of latency, projection, and functional synthesis. Cost is the secret of the material world. Secrecy is the cost of possessing an immaterial truth. They're heavy, inertial burdens of reality. Price is the lie of the market and a necessary sacrificial abstraction deployed to facilitate exchange. Lying is the price of social cohesion, a necessary sacrificial abstraction deployed to navigate the treacherous, high-friction waters of human interaction. Value is the confidentiality between the object and its user, an inert, projected utility that ignores the noise of the market. Confidentiality is the value of managed truth, an inert, projected social utility that ignores the noise of absolute moral puritanism. By psychosocially establishing these opposames and their introspective counterparts, one is provoked into reconsidering their own interactions with truth and worth. When an individual lies to protect a secret, they're engaging in a complex economic transaction. They're setting a moral price to protect a moral cost, hoping to achieve a confidential value. To condemn the lie without understanding the secret is to condemn the price without understanding the cost. Truth, furthermore, therefore, can be both brilliantly objective in its origins and necessarily subjective in its deployment. The intrinsic value of an object, the cost of its creation, and the price of its acquisition bear an ineffable, deeply architectural relationship with the human behavioural traits of confidentiality, secrecy, and lying. They are the twin engines of human survival, the ledger of our material sustenance and the ledger of our psychological endurance. To master one is to understand the other, and to observe them in totality is to witness the profound, tragic, and beautiful mechanics of the human condition. Thanks very much.